Welcome into the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. My name is Michael Round, and this is my co-host, as always, Dakota Moody. Dakota, how's it going?
Brother, I am doing great. It's a great day. Things are starting to slightly warm up outside, which means more opportunities to hit the golf course for me, which is always a blessing. But more than just that, it's just nice to be outside, see everything in God's creation, be able to enjoy life a little bit more when things are a little bit warmer. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's my experience.
It's been warming up a little bit more as well. It's still very cold at night most of the time. But yeah,
Hmm.
it is nice. It's nice getting some sunshine, not really a threat for winter weather, snow. So that's been good, like you said, so we can get outside and do a little bit more.
Yeah, I find it to be a blessing to have a little bit of the warmth that we've had. I'm not somebody who wants heat. I'm not a hot person, but
Right.
like it's great to have highs in the 50s again,
Yes.
other than
Yeah.
like highs in the 30s. Um,
More moderate weather.
yes, just a little bit, yeah, just something to where I can get outside and not immediately go, let me scamper inside again.
Yes. So things been going well for you?
Yeah, yeah, things have been very good. Somebody who both me and Michael here know, another person named Dakota Walton. He has gotten me started on D&D over the last few months, and I tell you what, it has absorbed me in a lot of different ways. I know some of you out there are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, and it is something that there's a lot of fun for people like me, and I'm gonna enjoy it until the time whenever I can't, when I have children and responsibilities and things that I should be doing instead of um, imagining worlds with friends in at the kitchen table. But I tell you what, we have spent a lot of time doing that, and I'm really enjoying it. Shout out to a fellow Dakota, a gentleman and a scholar, Dakota Walton, as we have been playing a lot of D&D recently and enjoying that.
Are you insinuating that Dakota doesn't have children? That
What
he's
I'm
not a
saying, well,
parent?
he's got a plethora of children. And full credit to him for balancing that with
Mm,
other such things. And I should say more credit to his wife than anything, um,
yeah,
for letting
that's where it
him for
is.
letting him do those things.
That's where the real credit goes.
So shout out to Emerald.
Definitely. We did something cool here at Westwood. We had a basketball tournament, 3-on-3 basketball tournament.
Yeah, I saw somebody won it. I don't know who that would
Yeah.
be. I saw somebody won it.
I mean, I had a reason to bring it up. Um,
Uh-huh.
no, but it was a lot of fun. It was really cool. And, giving shout out to Nathan for organizing that. But
There you
it was
go.
neat to do something that was just fun. You know,
Yeah.
I talk about it a decent bit, and what we're going to talk about today, overlaps that. But I think Dakota and I had a really good childhood from the standpoint of we had a lot of fun with the church,
Yeah.
and we have for many years. Some of my oldest and best memories are Dakota and I playing basketball out in the church parking lot, and we did any number of things, and so yeah, it's good to have fun with the church, and we can't lose sight of that,
Yeah.
how we share life together.
Yeah. Absolutely. And on that topic, we talk about me and Michael's upbringing as we grew up together, not only just playing sports together, but going to church together and all the experience we shared because of that, and thinking about that, we were talking about how, as me and Michael growing up together, we grew up going to a congregation that had Sunday evening worship. And in fact, a lot of the times when me and Mike would spend a lot of times together would be before or after Sunday evening worship, especially after Sunday evening worship, as me and him were playing basketball down at the court and down at the bottom of the parking lot, and our parents were chit chatting for an hour and a half after services ended. But
Well, that was it, is our parents were so talkative that,
yes,
we were left to our own devices.
that's correct. And so we ended up either picking up a football, a basketball, or a frisbee, either one of the three, and we're out there playing. But in talking about this, we were talking about how not only, we grew up and the standard was we had Sunday morning services. You went home for lunch, you relaxed for a little bit, maybe took a nap, and then you came back for Sunday evening service. And we spent that other time, that well, more time together. Similar kind of worship service to the morning, maybe a little bit more casual than the morning service, and then obviously you spent time afterwards. But as both me and Michael have grown up and had different church experiences, different places, we have been to churches that do not have Sunday evening worship. And some of you who may be listening to this podcast may either attend a church that doesn't have Sunday evening worship, or maybe you've never attended a church that has Sunday evening worship, or maybe kind of experienced both in this way. And what me and Mike want to talk about today in our podcast episode is kind of why we do the things that we do. What was the need for Sunday evening service in the first place? Why was that something that showed up? Talk about kind of the pros and cons of churches that have Sunday evening service, because I think right now me and Michael are in different worlds, because I'm at a church currently that has no Sunday evening service. Michael, I think your church kind of does like a small
Small
group kind of
groups.
format. Yeah, small group kind of format. And so we kind of have different experiences even now, and talk about kind of the pros and cons of those sorts of things. And then also talking about how wider Christian circles, how they're starting to view worship services and when they're done, to the point where, I mean, some churches aren't even having tradition. They're having kind of their worship services on days other than Sunday, and we're not talking about the um, groups that are outside of the faith who have had that moved their days of service around. But we're talking about people who are um, doctrinally and a lot of Christian ideas that are starting to move their services around, and why they're doing that. But first thing I think we talk about our experiences now. Michael, go through and talk a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about kind of what your church does right now for Sunday evenings.
Yeah, so well, specifically right now, we're doing a combined life group. We have life groups throughout the year, but we take a break for those life groups when they reset in the wintertime. And right now we're doing a combined life group that is kind of like a Sunday evening service. Um, but normally, life groups have different times. Some do life groups literally right after church, before lunch on Sunday.
Mm,
And then there's some life groups on Monday, some in the afternoon on Sunday, some on Sunday night. So it's up to the group when they wanted to meet. And I think that's pretty typical for small groups, for life groups. So yeah, it's good. We enjoy it. We enjoy being a part of a smaller group. And you think about a church of our size, you need to make it smaller in some way, because you can't have a meaningful and deep relationship with everybody in a church sometimes. And
yeah.
so ways to make it smaller, it's pretty healthy. Of course, I think in general, by nature, just doing a Sunday evening service will create that.
Hmm.
But I definitely see benefits to the life groups.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing I want to talk about today, is a little bit of the kind of the pros and cons with evening worship service, because I think um as being somebody who's experienced both, and Michael, you have as well in different ways, because you've kind
Hmm.
of experienced a lot of variety in the fact that you've been grew up like I did in a church with evening services, then you transitioned to a church that where you and your family moved to, that didn't have any evening services. You went to college and got different church experiences there. Then afterwards, you started working at a congregation who did not have any form of evening services nor small
Hmm.
groups. And then now you're at a place with small groups. It's kind of you've seen the wide spectrum there, as I kind of have as well. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, kind of what the pros and cons are with that. And I think one of the pros we could talk about, certainly, with having some form of evening time together on a Sunday evening, or maybe, as you say, small groups at different times of the week, to have that, is extra time for fellowship.
Yeah.
Would me and you have the kind of relationship we have? We probably still would have a pretty close relationship, but would we always have the relationship that me and you have had if we didn't have, every Sunday evening together, playing basketball, spending that extra time together, throwing the football around, or just hanging out talking about Pokemon or something, like we used to do back in the day? Like, would we kind of have that kind of relationship if we didn't have an extra couple hours to spend together on Sunday evenings? I say so. I
Hmm.
certainly think fellowship is certainly a big extra fellowship is a big plus when you're talking about evening services or some form of fellowship on a Sunday evening.
Well, and there's layers to this as well. There is kind of like an unwritten tradition that you have to have that additional Sunday service. And the way it developed, and I would be curious to know the exact reasoning, but I have a hunch it had to do with factory work or farming, why there was this extra service on Sunday evening. But it's been ingrained in among traditional churches that you have this Sunday evening service. And so the transitions in my life specifically, where we were at a church that had that traditional time, the church we went to in South Carolina when I was in high school, they had an additional worship service that was just like a Sunday night, but it was at 1:30 and 1:15 or 1:30, depending
Mm,
on the time. So like it was still checking that box, if you will. So there was
mm,
still the desire to have the traditional schedule, but at non-traditional times. So, we offered the Lord's Supper again to people who missed it in the morning, and we did that. Now, when I went to college, it was back a more traditional, you know, the same thing I grew up with. And where we were at in South Carolina at Golden Strip, we were doing worship in the morning and then Bible class in the afternoon. So we had two services, but it was really something that was different. We didn't have Bible class in the morning, the way maybe a more traditional church does.
mm.
And so um, we we were able to do some different things, but yet not deviate too much. Now, where it changed was when we decided to bring those together. And we decided to bring them both before lunch and have them consecutively. And when we did that, we didn't have anything in the afternoon. And where I think that was important for our church at that time was we had tremendous amounts of retention. We did have like 70% of people that stayed for Bible class or came back for Bible class when it was after lunch. And that number jumped up to 75 or 80% when we brought them together. And
Mm.
so we tried to make a decision that benefited our people so that they could do worship and Bible class together. And then when we broke for lunch, we were done for the day.
Yeah.
But that church also did and does a lot together. Those people are deeply connected in each other's lives. And so it worked for that church. Doing something in the afternoon or the evening really just burdened the core group of people that was always there. So I think in each context, it's different. And you should do your best. Leadership should do its best to appeal to the people within reason, appeal to its own people and listen to its own people and help them and serve them in the way that they can.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there, I think, has a lot of merit in the fact that each congregation, that real nice thing about the about the Churches of Christ that me and Michael are a part of, is the fact that each congregation can kind of, as long as they're following, I think the general ideas, the general foundation that Scripture has laid out for what worship is supposed to be, things around it can be adjusted to the needs of the congregation. You, for example, in that congregation, that not only you grew up in, but then were a part of later, the different congregations that you were a part of later. Um, One of the big things about that congregation is the fact that people would travel for 30 plus minutes to
Yes,
come to church. It wasn't everybody in the community just coming together in 5 to 15 minute drive for everybody. And so because of that, it was good for people to stay in the area and be able to not have to go home and then come back. Because if you have a 30-minute drive to church, if you had morning worship, went home, evening worship, you're talking about 2 hours of driving time on a Sunday. Um, at the beginning of your week, right before your work week begins, you're spending 2 hours not in worship service, 2 hours driving to
yes.
and from worship service. That doesn't make sense.
Mm,
And so it's better to either have something, as you said, either services lunch then second service, or service second service then lunch, to be able to make that make sense for people who are from a wider area. Those who most of their congregants are from 15 to 20 minutes away, that changes in their needs a little bit.
I
And
agree.
and talking about, you know, the flexibility that this kind of that can be provided in this way. I found an article from the Christian Chronicle by John Mark Hicks, actually, that talks about why evening services became a thing. Something that was very common within the American Restoration movement as it began as mostly just a time for prayer and study together. But in the 1940s, a very critical date in our nation's history, it became standard to offer evening worship because during this time, this is when shift work really became standardized because during the 1940s, obviously, we were kind of fighting a war. And so the Nazis didn't sleep. And so we had to keep producing on the lines for multiple hours and days. And so people would have to work their shifts, even on a Sunday morning, even on the
Hmm.
Lord's Day, because we had to make the products we needed to in order to ship them over to the boys overseas to be able to win World War II. Well, it was during this time that evening worship became kind of a standard practice because people wouldn't be able to get their opportunity to take the Lord's Supper in the morning, would miss their opportunity to be able to worship and fellowship with fellow believers, and so it was really instituted during that time that evening service became standard, and that became something that continued for a long time until certain people started to ask, is this something that's viable for us to keep doing? Obviously, when we're no longer having to fight the mustache man, and we're no longer all working shifts every Sunday morning, is it something that is still necessary for us to be able to come together? And for some congregations, they still have the traditional evening services as they have had it, and
Hmm.
others have decided that that is something that is not as beneficial. And I think but your experience in that way is unique because you've seen that within the church that you've been a part of. Of course, I've been in part of the congregations that have been like that as well. We have a similar kind of situation here, similar area to with the church that you experience, which is, we do have people who come from 30, 40 plus minutes away to attend church services here. And so because of that, again, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to have evening worship. And I think as well, when we talk about kind of in modern day America, um, there's a lot of questions they could ask about why we do what we do. And I do
Hmm.
think more people are asking the question, should we still have evening services? And I would say, as long as they are beneficial,
Hmm.
I would absolutely say we should be pro some sort of getting together and fellowshipping in the evening times after church. Whether that is, by the way, having people over to your house from
Hmm.
the congregation for dinner, whether that's meeting in small groups, or whether that's in some form of worship at the congregation. Um, but at the same juncture, though, is it always for the best? Um, can evening services become a drain on people? Can it become almost a reheated Sunday morning where it ends up just taxing more people, um, taking more of their effort and energy out, and it not have the benefits that you would think? And I know I personally have been a part of evening worship experiences that took away, that
Hmm.
deflated, that created um, apathy rather than growth,
Yeah.
spiritually and otherwise. And I think maybe a lot of us have experienced that at different times. And in those moments, you really say, is this something that glorifies God? Is this something that edifies and builds up? Or is this something that is, we're hanging on to this purely out of tradition and it is not healthy?
Right, right. Yeah, no, and it could be any of those things depending on the situation, for sure, for sure. And I think it's important too to think back at what the early church did. I mean, they
Yeah.
gathered together on the first day of the week. We also know that a big part of their gathering was eating together. And of
Hmm.
course, Paul's words of the Corinthians, they needed to be careful about that, and that it wasn't a way to look down on each other or confuse it with the Lord's Supper. And, another one of the things that they did, I mean, Paul preached until midnight. And so I have jokingly answered people if they ask, well, why don't we, or what should we do exactly what the early church did? Well, we would be having preaching until midnight or,
That's right.
something outlandish like that, in our minds, outlandish. But there was a desire to fellowship together and be together. And so, whatever combination of that, if we're worshiping on the first day of the week, That's the most important thing, and then we can build out from there. It's
Yep.
healthy and important to have Bible classes, especially for all ages, for our kids and for our adults. And then beyond that, we decide we want to incorporate times of fellowship or things. Then we again work out from that core of worshiping God and being committed to Him.
Yeah. No, I agree in that way, and I think when we see the example of the first century church, um, a couple of things I think would stand out. Number one is they did not neglect to meet together on the first day of the week. They made sure that was a priority. But did they only meet together on the first day of the week? Well, quite clearly, no. They didn't
Yeah.
only meet together on the first day of the week. They were with each other daily. They were in each other's homes daily. They were eating together daily, and they were sharing um, fellowship and ideas daily. Um,
Mm.
now, I think that kind of leads to interesting questions because as we kind of referenced earlier, they're starting to become within Christendom, wider Christian circles, the idea that, well, do we have to have worship service only on Sundays? Now, this is where I think we can have some interesting conversations about that, and we'll share our thoughts afterwards. But Michael, can you introduce the
Yeah.
idea of what you're seeing in these different areas where churches are starting to kind
You're
of
seeing
do
churches.
something
Yeah.
different?
You're seeing churches that are having services on other times. And I think it started with the Jewish idea and how a day starts at 6 p.m. the night before.
Yeah.
And so I think people, Christians have taken that to say, well, we can have a Saturday night service. And then from there, well, why don't we just do it earlier in the day on Saturday? And it's to the point that I've heard of churches that even have weekend gatherings like starting on Friday or Thursday. And so, even a church just 45 minutes up the road in Murfreesboro, a popular church, they have services on a couple of them on Saturday. And so it's once you kind of take away the sacredness of the first day of the week, or even you take away midweek gatherings and all days become the same. That's really kind of the way it seems as a society because we have so many people that work on the weekends and I think part of it is our consumer driven culture and our work oriented culture, our workaholic culture. And so it's like, well, we've just got to appeal to all people, and we end up, I think, end up in places we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But we see in the scriptures, and this is where I'll share my thoughts on this. We see in the scriptures they met on the first day of the week. And I tend to think that that would be what we think of as Sunday. I mean, Jesus did not rise from the dead at 6 p.m. on Saturday night. It was the dawn of Sunday morning, the first day of the week. And the point is remembering and memorializing the resurrection of Jesus. And so that's where I would say. And so I think Sunday and Sunday morning specifically is important. Now, if we choose to have worship on a Sunday afternoon, that's fine, I guess. But keeping it to the first day of the week is, I think, an important thing.
Yeah, and I will second what you have to say and add on to it a little bit more. I think, when we talk about the example of the first century church, I think you have to say they did meet on the first day of the week, and that was their primary time to get together to break bread, to remember the sacrifice of Christ, partake of the Lord's Supper, and to do those things together. And we see that example, and that's something that we can't get away from. And I think you made an excellent point in the fact that why are we starting to try to move these things? Is
Yeah,
it because we are trying to be holier? Is it because we are trying to get closer to God by moving these things? Or are we doing it to make God conveniently fit into our schedule? Make
yeah,
worship conveniently fit into our schedule. If we are trying to move what God sets down, the example that his people set down for our convenience, for our pleasure, then it's kind of clear where our priorities are at that point, right?
mm,
And I think that creates a lot of issues. And so the fact is that we should be trying to fit into God's schedule,
yeah,
right? Number one. So I do think that we can't be getting away from at least a form of worship on a Sunday. in my
Yeah.
mind, because that was the example that was set forward. Now, does that mean that we can only have things on Sundays? Well, obviously, most of us have a midweek Bible study and things like that at our congregations, which is great. I would love to see everybody in some way, shape, or form be connected with a group of believers in people's homes, really, is what I would love throughout the week to be able to worship and serve God and be able to bring people up. I hope families are spending time daily in God's Word together in their own homes and things like that. So that doesn't mean you can have to exclusively worship God on a Sunday morning, right?
Right.
However, if what are the reasons why we're starting to abandon these principles? Well, it's because we're reducing the importance of what it was to meet together on the Lord's day. As you say, to connect that with the idea that it was on the Lord's day, the first day of the week on a Sunday, that our Lord raised from the dead, that all the hopes of the Christian faith came true on that Sunday morning, and why we continue to practice our worship services on Sunday mornings to remember what Christ did and his resurrection. And so to move that based on convenience or our schedule or our work schedules or everything like that, that creates a problem. And
Mm.
so we can't be moving those things. But again, I think a lot of that comes back to the idea that we are minimalizing the importance of that worship time together. And frankly, when your worship service turns into a rock concert, yeah, you can have a rock concert on a Friday.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And two, like the way I would describe it is it's on Sunday morning. It's more than that. It's more than Sunday, but it's definitely not less.
Yes.
You know, because like you said, they were meeting daily and things like that. But we don't want to diminish that, to minimize it in any way, shape, or form. And two, like you probably can tell from our conversation, but it's not that we should make it harder on people than it needs to be.
Hmm.
Because we're talking about convenience as far as the timing on Sunday or the multiplicity of services, the amount of services. So we should be considerate of people, but to completely bend or break the early church tradition of meeting on Sunday morning or Sunday day, that's I think harmful to what we're trying to do. But any other final thoughts on this, Dakota? I mean, we could probably talk for a lot longer, but any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and I think this is the thing, I think we have to have the baseline that we talked about. I think every church has to have that baseline where we have some form of meeting on a Sunday morning together as the Lord's church, as God's people, as a church family, to be able to build up, to be able to meet in some way, shape, or form. And then beyond that, I think it's up to each congregation and believer beyond that point as to what they want to offer, based off of what their congregation needs. And again, I think that's not necessarily shouldn't always be just a decision of the church based in how you meet. I think each member needs to take that on themselves a little bit as well and look for how to meet and spend time with each other in God's word. Because again, we should always have Christ on our minds, Christ on our hearts, Christ on our lips, and in that, we should never really be far away from looking to fellowship, looking to build one another up. I love that to be in a congregation like I am now, where I feel like I'm talking to God's people all the time. And I understand that I'm a minister, so I get a little bit of benefit in that way. But it's not just
Yeah.
me. I talk to a lot of people in my congregation, and they're spending time with each other outside of church. And the more we do that, the more time we fellowship and build each other up, the better. And I'd say whatever we do, we need to do it to the utmost glory of God. So if you
Mm,
have a Sunday evening service, make sure it's the best. And that
mm,
doesn't mean the most entertaining. That means the best. That means
mm,
the most spiritually uplifting, the thing that glorifies God the most. And if it isn't, then it probably needs to be something you don't do, right?
mm,
If it ends up being a rewarm Sunday morning service again, that doesn't really benefit anybody, then maybe it's some time to look at either how to change that or to cut it. And it's
mm.
the same way with other extra times outside of that Sunday morning. Let's glorify God with what we do in our
Yeah.
lives, and especially when we meet together.
Mm. Definitely. And I think that's a great way to end it. We really want to glorify God with the lives and the opportunities He gives us. So we appreciate you guys joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's learn from Jesus and strive to live out His teachings. Bye for now.